Hi everyone and welcome back. So the next topic we have in the line is understanding monolith and microservices. This is really a generic topic and you might already aware what it is because you might have already gone through some content. Okay, what is monolith, what is microservices, and you're already aware about all these things. It's all about how we develop things, either a monolith way or the microservice way. Obviously, there are advantage and disadvantage. When you talk about microservices, yes, they give you the freedom that you can build a small service which is totally decoupled, no sharing of database, the architecture is clean, and you can even assign an individual team to build that service and manage that service. But obviously there are some pros and cons on both these approaches. This video is going to be a little theoretical. I'm doing everything in the microservices. You can check out my rest of the videos, all the full stack clone apps we are building using microservices. I mean, the idea of microservices is only to isolate and decouple the services so that when something went wrong, it's not the whole system went down. Earlier, we used to have a two-tier architecture in most of the applications. There is a front end, all the APIs are in the single backend framework. Either you write a Node.js, Nest.js, this is a user service. It is also managing the cart. It is also managing the booking. It is also managing the payments. And all different stuff are actually stacked in just a one single service, a single point of failure it is, because there is a single service. If anything goes down, all the APIs of individual services went down, right? So monolith, single service, I can deploy this easily, right? Just whatever you change it, I should be able to deploy. Development, it's like a single code base, and sometimes it's a cons. There are pros and cons. The the pros is you can take the advantage of performance because it's a single repository, so you know what needs to be done to improve the performance. Simplified testing because not all your code and your services are scattered or in the distributed environment. You have just a one single code base, one single set of APIs, so you can do the testing. Simplified, easy to debug. Okay, I can just go to one repository, request came here, okay, request goes there, and this is the problem. I can easily debug it. But when it comes to this scattered, distributed, totally decoupled architecture, it's really tedious because here is the service, then there is another service, then there is another service, and they might be talking asynchronously through some events and all. And if something goes wrong, we will start checking the data, we will start tracing the request, because request might be coming from the end user outside and request might be flowing through different services, right? So it's not easy to debug even in the real world projects. We have to do lots of things, the log tracing, and lots of concepts came into the picture, like we need to have a proper observability of the logs so that we can understand, okay, this was the request, where on what all places it went through. That is the way to clearly debug that. So disadvantage of monolith is slow development speed. Okay, 20 developers working on same repository. Scalability, you are not we are not scaling the individual components. Reliability, if there is any reliability means if there is an error in one module, all went down. And barrier in technology adoption here, because this is a single monolith, I cannot choose 10 different technologies, but here I can even choose a different library, different database. This is using MongoDB and I'm using Mongoose. This is using TypeORM. I'm using MySQL and Postgres. This is using again a Neo4j graph database, because this is the need of the business to have a graph database for this. And all of these services can be in the Golang, Node.js, Python, Django, all these, because it's that at the end they need to expose some interface and they need to handle the events, synchronous or asynchronous events coming to them. Okay, so what are microservices? Now you already understood. Now microservices is the concept which is widely popular and exist at the both the layer. Either you talk about the front end, then people also started talking about micro front end. So this is the micro front end piece which we is going to deal with the only particular service, right? Micro front end means splitting. I mean, the concept of micro front end is not new. It introduced with the Webpack Federation, module federation, that you can launch multiple applications and share the components of multiple applications into one landing page or one application. So whatever you are building in different applications can be combined or consolidated in a single application. Okay, so I mean, now we are talking about advantages. Earlier I was reading a thread on the LinkedIn that Amazon Prime moved their services to monolith and saving the 90% cost. I mean, obviously there are advantages and disadvantages. If you are doing unnecessary microservices, obviously the cost will go high because you will need a cloud infrastructure to deploy. You need a, like if you are using a serverless and you are using the serverless Lambda, API gateway, S3, all these cloud resources, and you have just a couple of services which can be easily written in just a single monolith, not a scattered distributed environment. Obviously there are advantages and disadvantages, and you have to deal with that. So microservices, agility, they promote agile way of working because small teams, individual services, flexible scaling. A microservice can reach to I mean, scaling means they are deployed independently. Like these, they can be deployed as a Lambda or EC2 instance or a container. They can be scaled individually instead of just scaling the whole monolith. Independently, they can be deployed. I can deploy this service, I can deploy this, and I can deploy this. There is no interdependency. Highly reliable and happier teams, obviously, like you can, individual teams are working, they can choose their stack, they can choose their schedule to deploy things in the agile way. Disadvantage is deployment, right? Because if some of the concepts which are dependent on 3 different services, then you need to be dependent on 3 different teams to deliver that particular feature. Exponential infrastructure cost, that is true in today's world because you need even proper testing infrastructure for the deployment. You need multiple Lambdas. I mean, if you talk about the serverless stack or a containerized stack, you will be using Kubernetes to manage them inside a containers, or ECS or serverless Lambda. So obviously it comes with a cost. Organization overhead, if that is not being managed properly, then obviously it become overhead. Debugging challenge, I talked about it. Okay, whenever the request is coming, it's hard to debug where it is failing. Okay, lack of standardization. Without a plan, different teams, they don't have proper standards to follow. But if there is a small team, let's say five developers team building 20 microservices, it's the best thing, right? Not all together, like in a particular period of time, they will be following the standards, they will be standardizing their repositories, they will be using common architecture pattern, and the clever leadership makes it possible to build the massive infrastructure with cost optimization. So there are always pros and cons. I love doing things in the microservices way. It deals, because we have done monolith for a long time. Now it's time to build microservices, but you need to check a case, do a case study, think about the cost optimization for the longer run, not just about, okay, for a monthly cost, this is what. Because getting RDS instance for these 3 different Lambdas, or getting the 3 different RDS instance for 3 different containers is more than having just a one RDS instance and having multiple databases on it. Now there are serverless Aurora, there are multiple options available to deal with that. But this is all about, okay, how you deal with the microservices. And microservice is just like a single individually deployable piece of code which only deals with its own data. It may be dependent on another service, but asynchronously. It should not be tightly decoupled with other service, or it should not be dependent on the data of another service. Yes, it can listen for the events and can act on it. That is asynchronous execution of a service, like event-driven approach. Event-driven microservices, where you throw the event and then the listener services are acting on to that and changing the data or the application state. So I mean, there are lots of things I already covered in multiple videos. I can share the playlist where I'm talking about the different architecture patterns to even build as microservices. In the microservices also there are serverless pattern, containerized architecture pattern, or API gateway pattern, circuit breaker pattern. All these patterns are there which you can study and can learn more to become a ninja developer. That is the final objective, right? How to become a ninja developer, how you can put your thoughts in the architecture discussion or technical discussions. Okay, that's it guys. In next video we will explore more about the architecture.